Hello everyone and welcome to the next video in the vocal analysis series. We are going to be talking about Tatsumi today, and as always when I start these, my prediction is that this is not going to be as long as some of the others, mostly because there isn't quite as much initial setup to talk about. And also because out of all the videos we've done, Tatsumi has the least number of songs, which makes sense considering that Alkaloid was a group that only came into existence halfway through Ensemble Star's life, at least at this point. And a lot of the other videos I spent a lot of time talking about group makeup and mixing and vocal blending and things like that, and as far as Alkaloid goes, my general perception of how people feel about them is that, with maybe one exception, they have a pretty strong discography and they really don't have any issues in terms of vocal blending, so there's not really a whole lot to talk about on either of those fronts. And again, after the last couple of videos, Tatsumi's voice is very neutral compared to some of the other stronger character voices and other more distinct tones that we have been talking about. And I was actually kind of surprised that I got more requests for Tatsumi than for anyone else in Alkaloid, because I think out of all of the members of Alkaloid, he probably has the least distinct voice, but I feel like that might actually be the reason people want me to talk about him, because admittedly I haven't thought about his voice that much either, especially compared to the other people in the group who, typically speaking, are a lot more recognizable or have aspects to their voices that make them stand out more. So hopefully going through this will allow me to change my perspective a little bit, and I think it will be interesting. So the first thing I wanted to cover is that there have been a few characters I've been holding out on just because I know that they have songs coming up that we have been given set release dates for. I did not know they were going to give Alkaloid and Crazy Bee songs to go along with the Project Sekai collab, but I can't wait on everybody. So if you haven't heard, what they're doing with them is they're giving them a song that already exists in Project Sekai, but the original voice actors are re-recording it and we're adding the Ensemble Stars voice actors to it. So Alkaloid is going to be doing Fragile, which is a song that within Project Sekai was performed by Akito and Toya, two of the members of Vivid Bad Squad and two of the members that are part of the collab. So because the new version isn't out yet, I thought I would play just a couple of snippets of that version of the song so you can hear what they sound like, and I think it's pretty easy to imagine the other members of Alkaloid fitting in with it, so. Hopefully when we get to the next member of Alkaloid in this series, I will be able to use the new version of that song, but in the meantime, it's a good song. I think it fits Alkaloid very well. I think King fits Crazy Bee very well, so I'm happy with the song choices that they made on those two fronts. In terms of a vocal comparison for Namo-san, there wasn't really a whole lot to go off of that I could see because he hasn't done a whole lot of other music projects, at least ones that I found or that I know of that he has sung for. There is one, and I had debated putting this in because technically we're not supposed to know who the voice actors in this game are, but if you know, you know, and the vast majority of them are from Josemuke games and have voices that are pretty recognizable regardless of the context. I am, of course, talking about New Carnival. He voices Yakumo. They had an Idol event a few years back where they recorded a song. I think there's only been a couple of events they've done songs for, but there are a few OnStars voice actors in the mix and voice actors from other games that you have probably heard of. Regardless, what they also did was they made solo versions of the song for each of the characters that sang in it, so it was very easy to get a good amount of his voice. So here we go. Summer dream このまま目覚め Summer dream. So I would say that the voice he's using for Yakumo is a little bit higher tonally than the one he typically uses for Tatsumi. It's a lot breathier. You can hear especially in the one section where the instrumentals kind of drop out a little bit. It's a little bit softer and more gentle, and there are certain technical things that you can hear in there that you can tell it is the same voice actor, but I thought it was an interesting comparison, so technically we're not supposed to know it's the same person, but come on. There we go. And that is really all of the preamble I have. I think everything else that we're going to talk about will come out as we go through the songs, so let's get right into it. てゆけ強く
くらいなら欲しいままに手だなすばいいだけだろう咲かないだろうただ一つの居場所に根を張り切り札を出せよ世界なんてないのさ
So the main thing with Tatsumi that I always noticed even back when these songs first came out is that it always kind of feels like he's singing under his potential. And that might be just because he doesn't have a particularly dramatic way of singing. He's very precise, he hits the notes, and then he moves on from them. There's not a whole lot of vocal gymnastics or playing around with his pitch or anything like that. And I don't know if that was a deliberate character choice at that point, but from what we now know of his character, it does kind of make sense given his past and what happened and how this is him coming back to being an idol after all of that. So there's nothing technically wrong with his singing. His pitch is very steady, his vibrato sounds very natural, and he does play around with it a little bit. In this song, the one note where it happens, it sounds nice. There's just a definite difference between how he sings and how the rest of Alkaloid sing. In this one, he gets to duet with Mayoi and Aira, and you can probably guess, given what I talked about in the beginning, that he will be able to blend well with pretty much anyone. And unlike the last couple of videos where it seemed like they were afraid to put certain voices together with Knights and Ryuseitai, they really aren't with Alkaloid. He sings the least with Hiro in the beginning. My feeling on that is just because their voices are the most similar, even though really they're not that similar. So it's not that they wouldn't sound good together, but I feel like they might have thought it was the least interesting option compared to everyone else. And like I also said before, there is really no issue with blending in terms of Alkaloid. 3 of them have voices that tonally at least would blend with almost everybody. Aira is kind of the outlier, but because it's just him, there's really no issue with mixing him with any of the others. The other thing that tends to happen with Alkaloid songs, and I actually like a lot, is that the vocalists are featured much more than some of the other units. So even though Tatsumi overall has less songs than a lot of characters, the actual vocal part of this video was not that much shorter because they just sing more. They sing more on their own, they sing more in duet parts, there's less full unison singing compared to what they're doing as individuals or duos. Which meant more work for me having to cut these together, but is also probably better for the video because you get a lot more examples.
目覚めきれない可能性の前でなんで僕らは臆病だねいくら思っても自分の顔がこの衝動を生み出す一本に伸ばした両手に確かめいこうそこに立ってる血を抜けた
There's a lot of really nice stuff happening in Tsubasa Moratorium. It's the first time he gets to sing with Hiro, and you can hear it when they're singing together that their voices are very close to each other. I would say Hiro still has a more distinct voice, so you can kind of pick him out between the two of them, but as I said before, we really have no issue with any of the blending in terms of Alkaloid itself. Given that this is a slower song, there's a bit more technical singing going on than there was in Kiss of Life, which is pretty fast and pretty rhythmic. The one thing I wanted to touch on, and this is something that people had asked me about, is what it's called when you have a singer who pushes a note louder as they sustain it instead of letting it naturally fade away or pulling it back. And there is a technical vocal term for being able to sustain a pitch and both get louder and then get softer on the same note. But as a musician, what we would call an increase in volume on the same pitch is usually just a crescendo. So it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. It sounds really cool. It sounds really dramatic. Some characters do it a lot. Tatsumi, I don't think, does it very often, but he does do it in this song, and it's noticeable enough that I wanted to bring it up. The other thing I think I can mention at this point is the quality of Tatsumi's head voice is very interesting to me because it's not quite like Natsume where it's very hard to tell when he's going into head voice. You can hear it, but there's this very, very subtle tonal shift that he does where it almost sounds like he's not pushing as much air through, which usually isn't what you would think about when you're going into head voice. But it's something that's very consistent, and you'll hear it throughout other songs where he goes up into higher notes too, which isn't to say that he can't belt, because he certainly can, but his head voice has this very particular tone to it that listening through all of these I've kind of picked up on over the last few days. Like this one, for instance. I wouldn't necessarily call that belting, because again, it's very hard to tell where the vocal break in anyone's voice is, but he is very capable of singing higher notes at a louder volume. So when he goes into that kind of very soft, very restrained version of his head voice, it becomes more noticeable. This is another song that overall is very fast, very rhythmic, so his rather precise way of singing works really well with it. And you can hear how much faster his vibrato is in this one, so again, that shows that he does have control over what kind of vibrato that he's using at any given time. The other thing about Tatsumi that I find interesting is that at least at the beginning, he never really got any vocal features. Like if there was a line in a song that was supposed to be more dramatic or had a really long sustained note or had something else about it, usually it always went to Hiro or to Mayoi. And Tatsumi was always kind of, holding things together on the back end, but not necessarily putting himself out in front as any sort of a featured voice in these instances. And again, not sure if that's just how things shook out, or if it was a deliberate character choice. I'd like to think it was the latter, just because it makes a lot of sense. But either way, something I've noticed.
だって決めつけてすぐに後悔してろ正論なんだ頭じゃちゃんと分かってるすり落とされそうに今日も折れそうな心でそれでも手なんて生まれない努力も自分なら色も書き直して体だけ向いて戻れ踊れ OGA
It probably won't come as a surprise to learn that typically when he is singing duets with other characters, he is more often than not mixed under whatever other character he is singing with, and again, providing that baseline for their voices to do more of the noticeable aspects of the duet. You can hear another really quick pop into head voice at the beginning of this, and it still has that really light, breathy quality. It's essentially the voice that he was using for Yakumo, but in Tatsumi's case, he really only uses it when he goes into head voice, and his normal bass tone is a lot lower and doesn't really have that kind of feeling to it.
ほらねまた君はそうやって意味ありげに笑うんだよベゴニアの花が開いたようにないないない思っちゃいない駆け引きのカードはだからって待ってちゃ始まらないんだね情が早って正解なんてないね
So at the end there, you can hear how loud he can get and how well he can sustain even those higher notes. So it is very interesting that when he pops into head voice for shorter sections, generally he cuts the notes very short. He'll hit it, he'll get off it, he'll be done with it. When he actually goes into what might be a belt, or at the very least is a much stronger version of his natural chest voice, the notes become a lot more sustained even at those higher pitches. So it's very interesting to hear the difference and how he's using his voice in these different situations as well. And this is one of those things that I always kind of knew, but listening to a lot of these songs really solidifies it. But Alkaloid does have a lot of these very fast, rhythmic, precise songs, which we've already established fit his voice really well, especially generally in the verses. So when he gets these longer solos, it's very easy to hear how good he is at keeping time with everything that's going on.
見えしない反復しかないが真のなせない地図反発なんていらないね結局と知恵だって正誤表はない曲という一枚をいらないなら
The bridge in the song is kind of the first time he gets to be really dramatic, which is nice because it's a departure from everything else that he's done. Believe for Leaves might be my favorite Alkaloid song. It is honestly maybe one of my favorite OnStar songs in general, just because it was so unexpected and I ended up liking it so much more than I thought I would. Most of that I'll save for the Mayoi video because obviously he's the one that really gets the feature here. And because of that, Tatsumi again doesn't really get to show off his voice in any of these sections, but since the song is playing, I thought I would mention it just because. But yeah, that middle bridge section, he's definitely doing more of a push and pull than he's done before. It's almost kind of a Mayoi-esque way of singing that line. And keep that in mind because he will get to show off his voice more in the future. 誰も分かりようがない影が青くなるから先は未開の領域最後言い訳も特に通用しないすごい一週間待ちの足じゃ回るさ哀れなパサイエンティスこの心を諦めずに今日主張しては傷ついてもBut even in this one, he's singing a lot, but again, it's all very restrained. You can hear when he's singing with Hiro how hard Hiro is going on some of those words. And again, Tatsumi is just kind of there in the background, holding it all together, making sure nothing goes too far off the rails, and that really is kind of his purpose in the group. It works completely fine from a blending perspective because they kind of need that with some of the stronger voices that they have, but again, it doesn't allow him to show off a lot, and even when he has solo lines, you can hear that he still feels like he's holding himself back more than he really needs to. And listening to these songs as a whole with all the voices and all the singers together, I feel like it's not quite that noticeable and is actually probably needed. But isolating it like this, you can really hear just how stable his voice is. Even though he's not doing a lot of fancy things, he's doing exactly what he needs to keep the song moving along. Which isn't to say that I don't wish he had more features, but we'll get there.
侵略者たちは言う大な世界に忠誠を侵略者落ちなくレッツビー打ち分かる感動を秘密を支える根底には色鮮やかな輪角に描こう神様よ後ろよ選ぶんだなら春をごく真紅のフェイス
For Million, again, he gets one really nice longer solo where he gets to push a little bit more, he pops up into head voice again. Again, Tatsumi's voice I think is really nice, like it's really pleasant to listen to. He just happens to be in a unit with people that have far more distinct voices than he does. Not his fault, doesn't affect how technically good his singing is, but I do feel like it certainly makes it feel like he's more in the background, partially because he is, but again because of that comparison. And you can especially hear that when he's singing with Hiro and Mayoi even more, and we haven't really talked about their voices together yet, but they do blend very well. And I think general fandom perception of Mayoi's voice is that it's super interesting. I once heard someone describe his voice as if Shakira was reincarnated as a male teenage idol, and I don't think that's inaccurate at all. And I think as time has gone on, it's become even more dramatic than it was in the beginning. So when you have a voice like that, it is almost necessary to pair it with someone that can pull it back. And at this point, I think it's obvious that that really is Tatsumi's role when it comes to a lot of these duets. That last note is like textbook vibrato, honestly. Vibrato, again, is one of those things that is very subjective and people have different feelings about it, but that really long, pure, sustained note with just a little bit of a vibration on the end is very, very nice. Again, speaks to how technically good he is as a singer, even if he doesn't get to show that off a lot. In this song, I think he gets to show it off more, which is good because it is his 5-star unit event feature song, but I think that combined with the fact that it is a Halloween song is allowing him to get a little bit more dramatic, and I'm glad that it happens. Again, you can hear the push and pull in his voice is so much more varied than it typically is when he's mostly singing at one level a lot. He even does a tiny bit of that ending note vocal cry on the one high note, which I don't think he's ever done before. We've already talked about how good his last note was. He's playing around with head voice and belting a lot more, so I think this is a really good showcase of his voice. I wish things like this would happen more, and they might in the future, because I think the main thing that going through this video has shown me is that when it's needed, his voice is the perfect temper to the other voices in Alkaloid, but he can do so much more as a solo vocalist, and that's where I hope they're going with his voice as time goes on. This is the song I was talking about at the beginning when I said that Alkaloid's discography is generally favorably reviewed, with one exception. This is the exception. It's a meter change. That's literally all it is. I think part of it is also because there are so many vocal effects on it, but honestly it doesn't bother me that much because the style of the song is so electronic-y to begin with that I don't think the vocal compression and the exaggerated reverb and things like that sound out of place the way they might in a different style of song. But I think the main reason that people feel this song is messy or chaotic is because there is a meter change, and it's a meter change in a faster song. We've talked about meter changes before, like In Honey Milk, for instance, where the pre-chorus goes into 3/4 while the rest of the song is in 4/4. And that's exactly what's happening here. But because stylistically the songs are so different, it doesn't feel like nearly as jarring a change in that one as it does in this one, where it just kind of hits and then goes out of it again. And you don't hear it here, unfortunately, because while there are kind of mini duets in the part that is in 3/4, they were so short it didn't pay for me to put them into this video. But for anyone that ever had questions about why does Blackout Seesaw sound kind of messy, that's the main reason. It's just a meter change. And a meter in music just tells you how many beats are in every measure before the sequence resets again. Typically, most commercial music that you hear on the radio is in 4/4 time, which means that there are 4 beats in every measure, typically with a type of note that we call a quarter note being the standard beat length. So if you listen to a song on the radio and you count along to it, usually if you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, it'll make sense. Doesn't happen all the time, but I'd say a good 85 to 90% of songs are either in 4/4 or maybe something like 2/4, something that still ends up dividing the beats in the same way. Whereas songs that are in 3/4 have a much different feel to them because our brain just naturally seems to like things that can be divided into 4s. It's a nice even number. So initially listening to this song, I had assumed that it might be a tempo change along with a meter change, but no, it's just a meter change at a very fast tempo. So really what's happening is it's going from 4/4 in the verses, so we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So you can hear kind of how the beats divide and how it has a distinctly different sound even with me just counting them out. And add that to everything else that's going on in the song, and the fact that normally it will take your ear a little bit to adjust to a beater change. I think that's the reason a lot of people don't like the way it sounds. However, technically, there's nothing wrong with how it sounds, but it really is a matter of opinion, and I am so sorry I went into music theory there. That was probably really boring, but it's the best way I've got to explain why some people feel the way they do about this song. In terms of what we're actually here for, there's not a whole lot that is different in this one. Again, he's got the electronic effects on his voice in the one section. If anything, I would say that he and Hiro are more evenly mixed here, and they both go up pretty high at the same time together, and they sound good, so I'm glad that in certain instances, they're actually pushing him in the mix more than they would have at the beginning.
遠い空を走っていた諦めていたけど君のことを今日は知っている知っていく先へとに暮れた夜の向こうさ確かめられるんだ空を見るみたいに伝えてる思いは違うけれど強く信じられたからSo I'd say that Across the Universe is probably the best showcase of his voice that we've had so far in an overall sense. And I've been thinking about a way to word this as I've gone through the video, but the best way I can describe his singing at the beginning is, in a lot of ways, it's almost like singing by numbers. And this is a phrase that I use sometimes with my music students where I talk about playing by numbers, which basically means that they're hitting all the correct notes, but there is no emotion, there's no feeling behind them. And that's kind of what Tatsumi felt like in the beginning, which again, I would really like to believe is a character choice because it works so well if it is. But it's the idea that he's hitting all the notes fine, they sound good, he's bringing in the proper vocal techniques when he needs to, but there's no real feeling behind them. And in this song, and in the last couple of songs that we've talked about, it seems like that's changing. And it doesn't even just have to do with being dramatic, because you can express feeling through vocal work without drama, essentially. But there are just little things that he's doing where everything is not quite as precise as it was at the beginning. There's more of a feeling of fluidity as opposed to rigidity in the way that he's singing. And even a couple songs ago where we talked about that little bit of a vocal cry that he puts in, that is just another way of adding feeling to music without necessarily changing any of the techniques that are inherently there. And especially his last part in here, he is really pushing and it sounds really good, and I would truly like to believe it's just Tatsumi coming into his own and feeling more comfortable doing that on a stage again after what happened in the before times, and I will probably keep thinking that way if they keep doing songs like this because it makes the most sense. And even in this one, it's a much more upbeat song, but there's so much more personality in his voice that is shining through, and it's really nice to hear. And he's still doing all the things he did before. Like, his timing is still good,
He still kind of pushes into those little breathy head voice moments now and again, but then you have times like the last solo there where you can tell that he's just kind of letting go a lot more than he used to in the past. So I feel like after the last few songs where that's been happening more routinely that this is going to be a thing. I hope I'm not proven wrong, but that's my guess as to where Tatsumi's going vocally in the series after this point. I'm really glad that he gets to sing with everyone from Crazy Bee, so we get to hear what his voice sounds like with all of theirs. The only one in this one that's kind of hard to hear is Kohaku, but he does get to sing with Kohaku again later, so we'll talk a little bit more about that then. Like I said earlier, there really aren't any voices that he wouldn't be able to mix with fairly well, but it is interesting in a group like Crazy Bee where you have two of them that have significantly deeper voices than I would say most of Alkaloid sings with normally. You can hear that the mixing is a lot more even, so when he's singing with Himeru and when he's singing with Rina, their voices are pretty much mixed at the same level. Again, Kohaku's very hard to hear because they're kind of singing under everyone else who's doing something different, but with Nikki they kind of switch back to the idea that Tatsumi's voice is more supporting instead of being equal, and you can hear Nikki more prevalent in the mix than Tatsumi is. Artistic Partisan is another one of my favorite songs. I think at the time I definitely thought it felt more like a Valkyrie song than an Alkaloid song, but then right after that Alkaloid came out with Believe for Leaves, so honestly considering that I think it suits both groups fairly well. And amazingly, I haven't mentioned watching the live concerts yet in this video, but this is my second day of recording commentary, and between then and now I did go back and watch some of the Fourth Starry stage, just to remind myself of what Alkaloid is like live, and they are very good, and I would say that Namo-san typically does sing with more emotion in the live concerts compared to the recordings, so as always, I recommend going to watch those, but the main reason I'm mentioning it here is because Artistic Partisan actually debuted at the Starry Stage 4th, and then wasn't officially released until about a month later. And that was the one concert that I actually paid for a ticket for the live viewing for the second night, so it wasn't really the first time they ever performed it was the second time. But, full disclosure, I mostly chose that night because I was very hopeful that Deadmans would perform, and they did, and that made me very happy, but I think it's interesting to know that the first time anyone heard Artistic Partisan was a live version of it and not the recorded version. So if you want to go and watch that, again, I would recommend it. And as always with these cross-unit songs, the individual characters don't get a whole lot to sing. He does get to sing with both Mika and Shu, which is nice. I realize this is the first time in this entire series I have talked about Mika just because of the way that the groups and group songs have shaken out. And Mika is my favorite character in OnStars. He has been since 2016. And typically it doesn't always line up that my favorite characters in these Idol series are also the ones that have my favorite singing voices, but Mika is really close. His singing voice is so versatile and so far removed from his speaking voice that when he is singing with Tatsumi, again, they're very evenly mixed because Mika can sing low fairly easily. And the same thing with Shu. They're pretty evenly mixed. Shu's voice, obviously, is on average a lot more dramatic than anything that Tatsumi sings, so he feels more prevalent in the mix just because he's doing these other vocal techniques, but volume-wise, they're pretty even, I would say. This song, at least so far, is kind of the exception for the cover songs where all of the characters get to sing a lot, to the point that I think I actually had to cut this down a little bit, which certainly didn't happen with any of the other ones I've looked at so far. I think Tatsumi's voice suits this song very well. For the most part, outside of that last line, it's fairly low, it's fairly soft. It kind of slots right into that sweet spot in the middle tone of his voice. And this is where you get to hear him sing more with Kohaku in a way that you can actually hear their voices together. And again, the two of them, fairly evenly blended. Madara, on the other hand, I would say that Tatsumi is singing under him, and Madara has kind of the more prevalent part in the mix. So I would say that's kind of becoming a pattern. If Tatsumi is singing with people that have a voice that's similar to his or of a lower tone, he's usually mixed pretty evenly with them. If he's singing with characters that have a higher tone, he's usually mixed under them. This song is the one exception to what I just talked about because when he is singing with Kanata, he has the higher part. And that's pretty much the only time it ever happens. And I had spoken about this in the Kanata video as well, but it's basically the opposite, both from what you would expect from what their voices sound like and what you would expect from the pattern that the music producers have established up until this point. But I'm really glad it happens because he sounds fine going up there, taking the higher part. Unfortunately, it doesn't really happen at any point after this, but maybe that will change in the future. The opening solo, again, is really nice. He's got a very long time of just him singing. A lot of, again, really nice sustained notes, really gentle vibrato onto those notes. And then when he's singing with Hiyori and Arashi, they kind of return to the old pattern where he is singing under them and their voices are higher than his.
風早先輩の懺悔室お悩みや心の使いは共に悩み解決すればお悩みや心の使いは共に悩み解決すればお悩みや心の使いは
There actually is quite a bit more singing in this song than I thought there was. And these duets are long. They're like 2 full lines each, so I only took a little bit of each one, just enough to kind of give you an idea of what he sounds like with everyone. And again, we're kind of back to the normal pattern where we have higher voices like Hajime and Ritsu, where he is mixed under them. Himeru and Rina we've already talked about, he's mixed evenly with them. Koga is probably the most interesting, because Koga's is the only one where there's harmony and they're not just singing unison at the same pitch. And this seems to be a fairly common thing with Koga. I know in some of the other videos where he's been singing with other people, there's generally a lot of harmony going on, which I presume means that Anayu is comfortable singing harmony because they keep giving it to him, but it always sounds really good, so I'm glad that it happens. And again, when he's singing with Koga, we get one of those rare instances where he is actually singing the melody line, which in this case happens to be the higher line because Koga's taking the lower harmony. And again, I threw in that line at the beginning to get a baseline of what his voice sounds like. His singing and speaking voices are fairly similar overall, but I always like having that just as an example in these videos.
あなたからこの世界へ降り注ぐ確かな迷いに震えてた瞳聞いてくることがあるんだろう確かなこと伝えられるんだ思うのは心が手を取り奇跡の光を信じよう
And obviously, since Tatsumi is a newer character, he only has one solo, so this is the only one we can go off of, which I think showcases a lot of aspects of his voice really well, but doesn't really delve into anything new, and doesn't really push him in any way. There's still a lot of really nice vibrato happening, there's nice sustained notes, there's a lower section, which again shows off that really nice lower part of his voice that he really doesn't get to use that often, but it's always nice when he does. So I would say this song overall reflects his character very well. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it sounds like he's holding himself back anymore, but we know that there is more he can do by this point. And that brings us to the end. I do think this video is going to end up a little shorter, at least I hope it will. And I hope it was interesting. It was certainly interesting for me to actually isolate Tatsumi's voice and look at him on his own as opposed to as a member of Alkaloid. And I think what this has really shown me is that he's a very technically proficient singer that still probably has a lot more to show than he's been allowed to up until this point. So I would say, if anything, my wish for the future would be that, like the last few Alkaloid songs, it keeps progressing in that way and allowing him to showcase more of his voice and just giving him more of those showcases even within the Alkaloid songs, because I think he's perfectly capable of handling those moments. Alright, up next, I said I was debating between Subaru and Naozuna last time. I think I'm gonna do Subaru. I know he has quite a few songs, but I think I'm gonna do him next. because I do feel like it's time we touched on Trickstar a little bit. And also because I did promise to do Shu afterwards, so we're gonna get a couple of those ex-Valk songs there anyway. So that's the plan for right now. Subaru next, and admittedly I haven't really started his video, so I'm going to try and get it done within the next couple of weeks. This time of year is always hard for me creatively. It's like minus 30 outside, and I don't even need to say whether that's Celsius or Fahrenheit because that's about the point where they intersect, so it is very cold out. And that certainly never helps my creative inspiration, so I'm gonna do my best. If you enjoyed this video, as always, please do like, leave a comment, do all of the things that the algorithm would like you to do. I am so close to 2,000 subscribers. Thank you all so much. And as always, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.